Okay, so we are now going to go to our first speaker, who is Sue England. And Sue is a human rights lawyer living and working in Germany. She does sessions on human rights for women, particularly for non-lawyers.
So it sounds a bit formal. Non-state legal orders based on religious belief systems, their danger to the national and international rights of women. Well, this is actually specifically a topic about religions and cults seeking control over women, but by pretending to be legal organizations and impose what they are calling legal rules on women. And it's not new, but it's come up again big time in the UK recently. So this is what inspired us to get me to do this talk today. And some people may have seen this if they're watching the British press. This is actually The Guardian, and it's written by a very famous female feminist in the UK. And it's headed, "The world is getting its first Sikh court in London. That is a threat to women's rights," by Pragna Patel, who some of us may know. And I've actually given you the link to that because it's a very interesting article about this whole issue, but based around this new Sikh court. Okay, so, and I'm quoting her here: "With the UK judicial system cut to breaking point, conservative religious forces are moving into a space vacated by the state." And I certainly agree with that. But obviously, there are other religions and cults which have been doing the same thing. I'm going to focus mainly on the UK just because I know this better. But it's related to the other issues in a sense, because I always remember Joe first introducing me to this idea that it's a new cult of misogynist men in dresses, is the trans cult that we're talking about. But of course, we all are well exposed to and know all about the influence of other cults of men in dresses. In other words, religious organizations and cults. So in the UK, we have we have I always get it the wrong way around. We have Beth Dins, which call themselves Jewish courts. We have Muslim courts, increasingly Hindu courts, and now this Sikh court. And these things are also happening in other countries. But as I repeat, I'm going to focus on what I know about the UK. So this is very similar in other ways because these are organizations taking words and misusing them and gaining power and control by misusing them. So although this is written by Pragna Patel and she has to get it out to the wider audience, what's the word that's wrong in the top line of that? Court. It isn't a court. It's something which certain sectors within the Sikh religion have decided to call a court and presenting it to us as a court. It's not. So I will repeat what Pragna Patel also says in this, because this I agree with. When many minority women, because she's in an organisation which has worked particularly with minority women for a long time in the UK, seek to escape abuse, they're subject to pressure and coercion to stay silent and tolerate the abuse for the sake of keeping their family unit intact. Their profoundly unequal status, coupled with an unequal power distribution over knowledge of legal rights. Here, she does mean legal rights, real legal rights, will make it even more difficult to reject attempts at mediation. Most people have heard of that word. Well, it is a word that has come in from the legal sphere, or to complain when decisions are made against their interests. Well, what sort of decisions? Who by? Are these legal decisions? No, they're not with these organisations. The formal UK legal system, in other words, the real legal system, allows women to obtain legal advice and representation in compliance with the rule of law and principles of fairness. This is a stark contrast to religious courts. And again, she's using that word to try and, make people understand what is being said. But of course, it's not true. They are not courts. So we have to bear in mind here, and this applies to all these organizations, wherever they are being set up, there is no legal meaning in the word religious marriage. There's no such thing in law. Certainly not in the UK, but in many other countries as well. It doesn't exist. It doesn't have any legal form at all. Marriage is marriage, and it's always governed by the state. Even though many aspects of it will come in your society from the predominant religions in your society, especially going back, it is governed and controlled by the state. The rules are made through a democratic process, and the only way that you can enforce them and deal with them and protect yourself is by going to the courts of the land. So as soon as somebody uses this phrase for you, religious marriage, they're telling you something complete. They may not realize, but they're telling you something completely different. It's not law we're talking about then. It is people within a certain community think there is something called religious marriage, and they may have rituals and celebrations around it, but it has no legal meaning whatsoever. You have to be married according to the rule of the law of the land, which is completely secular, and we've decided on the rules and they apply to everyone. And the place where you have to go is to a state authorized body. And then if you want a divorce, for example, or you want legal issues dealt with, you need to look at the law and you need to go to a state court, maybe, unfortunately, to be dealing with divorce. Exactly the same thing, therefore, is applying, as I've started to say, religious court or tribunal. Court and tribunal are in English just two words for the same thing, but a court or a tribunal is provided by the state and runs according to state laws. And also, very importantly, in all the human rights legislation, they set up rules that everybody should be treated fairly in courts, for example. But then they're talking about the courts of the land, which we've all set up and pay for as well as deciding the rules. Ditto, some of these organizations are setting up councils. They're not going and using the word court or tribunal, but what they're actually setting up are things that are supposed to actually control people that come to them, like a court with decision makers who apply rules and are supposed to learn evidence and lay down decisions that everybody should then follow. It has no legal meaning whatsoever. So I disagree with my own title for any of those who can think back to that. Non-state, and now I've put marks around it, legal order. It's not a legal order. So it's not, there isn't even, you can't actually say non-state legal order. It isn't legal. It isn't an order. It doesn't have any bite. This will be, in this particular set of circumstances, a set of religious dogmas imposed by the powerful in a certain community. And obviously there can be different ones. And we're focusing today on religions or cults. Marriage, this word marriage, if they're using it, it's the one and only. In the UK, it's a civil law issue. You're married or not married. We do distinguish clearly between the single state and the married state. And then obviously there are other variations now, of course. You are somebody who has been married, but are effectively single again because you have become divorced. You can only use the word marriage correctly in terms of what our state lays down as a civil status and a legal state, the one of being married. And this is particularly for, say, people who come from a Christian heritage, and particularly in the UK. What has become completely obfuscated is that marriage in the UK has always been, and going back hundreds and hundreds of years, a civil contract. It's like, I'm sorry to say, but buying a car. I want to enter into contractual relations with somebody over something, and we agree a contract. And of course, in the old days, and even now, you can do that verbally. It doesn't have to be in writing, but the two of you have to come to agreement about a certain set of facts. So, as has become completely obfuscated, in fact, if you get married in the UK, even if you go to church, or even if in some occasions you go to a mosque, come on to that later, you are entering into a civil contract, and you always have done. And basically, the religious got involved with it because, of course, it was in the culture, but also because remember, when people couldn't read and write, and when the government wanted to sort of set up a structure of control throughout the society, and when there were more people moving around, the government wanted marriages correctly registered with them so they knew who was married and who was not, and who were entering into these contracts. It was very convenient to ask our Church of England to do it, say in England. They had people who could read and write. They could afford the paper and the ink, although they grumbled about it immensely. They had stone buildings, they could keep these records. So, to caricature a bit, they only got involved as administrators for the state. And the state said there are all these people out there in the countryside and other places doing contracts between themselves, a man and a woman, to get married. It can be oral. They can do it, most people did do it orally, their pet family may or not know, etc. But they've entered into a marriage contract and it's binding, and we want it recorded. And that's where all this came from. But you are still getting into a legal contract, but a civil contract. And the rules about its formation of this contract came more and more under sort of government control, but drawing on the practices of the country. Its continuance and its end, once divorce is allowed, for example, is all set down in our democratically made legislation. And the process for you getting married or divorced is all set down in our democratically made legislation. And the courts and the registrars and things that deal with this are all controlled by our democratic laws. So, just to bring us on to this situation that most of us, certainly in the UK, will be very familiar. You go and you're getting married, or somebody is getting married. It can be in a registry office. Some case it can be in a mosque, it can be in a hotel. There are different forms of celebrants. You can do the whole wiggy thing with a meringue dress and cakes and hundreds of guests, whatever, or you can do it much more simply, or you can yeah, you can do it much more simply. You can have it embodied in a religious ceremony or not. If you go to the registry office, there is no form of religious ceremony. So here are the contracting words for a marriage, which are brought from British law going back hundreds of years for a civil contract of marriage. And they were put in what we actually call the Marriage Acts, and they continue. So your registrar or your vicar or anyone you've got two choices. I call upon these persons here present to witness that this is what usually the man first has to say, full legal name, to take thee, nice old fashioned language, full name, to be my lawful wedded husband. And the other And you are contracting with that person. And the more modern formulation is simply, I, whoever, take you to be my wedded wife and husband. Is the registrar officially marrying you? No, the two people do. Is the priest officially marrying you? No. They are witnessing a civil contract. And what was important, the more and more people in society, that the society knows what's going on and knows that these contracts are made. To make a marriage, it's all controlled by our law, always has been. Two people must follow UK law. Obviously, now we can have marriage between people of the same sex. It must be registered with the Registrar of Marriages. The registrar will check that everything is legal, and that's why you have to go down along to the registry office and fill in on the forms and produce papers and get the authorization, and then either organise to be married at the registry office or in another place. The people who do it, if you're not in the registry office, have been legally authorized to do it by the state, even if they're performing religious ceremonies. They do the state's job within a religious ceremony, but the state's job has to be done. And so, for example, I mean, I've come across this because I knew one or two registrars for a while and talked to them. And the reality is that, say, in church marriages in Britain, sometimes the couple have gone to the registry office and filled in all the appropriate forms, and then they have to liaise with in this case, Church of England vicar, and he has to do it all properly and then record it, and it all has to be sent back. And so they've done the whole thing, and something went wrong with the rules. The bans weren't given 6 weeks, or somebody forgot to sign something, or somebody didn't speak the right words. You're not married. So registrars, when they discover this a bit later, when the papers go in a few days later to the registry, have to sort of quietly contact the people involved and say, I'm totally sorry about this, but you're not married. You have had the full meringue thing and 120 guests at St. Botolph's, but unfortunately, you're not actually married. But we will fix it so you can get married on the quiet in the registry office as soon as possible. It will have to be another 6 weeks, so they'll have to have the 6 week delay again. And then we'll get you married. And then it's up to you whether you tell all your friends and family about this. But your marriage certificate will tell they all think you got married in June. Well, you got married in late August. And that's the date on all the papers for all legal purposes. Okay. And it's also relevant to the fact that some other religions, some of the people in those religions have decided to take part in this as well. And they follow the rules. So you can get married in some mosques. Other mosques don't have anything to do with formal legal marriage. They may well be having ceremonies, but they're not plugged into the civil law, the national system. So you have to go and do the process through the registry office as well. Okay. So I think I've persuaded people, I hope, that the rules are secular, not religious. Okay? So there's no marriage made if the rules are not followed exactly. And we can understand where we're sort of going a bit as well with this idea of now saying there are religious courts, tribunals, councils who can help you, with problems within your marriage, and in fact also help you if this relationship is breaking down. If you've only had a religious ceremony, you're not married. And you never will be married, even if you go along sort of telling everyone you're married and doing things that sort of married people do. You're not married at all. You have to follow the marriage acts exactly. No religious ceremony is relevant. But of course, particularly those people who've only had a religious ceremony and don't seem to understand that they're not married, they are then more likely to fall into this sort of trap of dealing with the rest of it through religious organizations who sort of say they're courts. Well, the religion wasn't able to marry you, and they're certainly not able to deal with problems in your relationship and then divorce you. If you're not married, you can't be divorced. And sort of to bring it up a little bit more to date, the rule of civil partnerships are similar. And I want to add at this stage that there's a big push in this direction, as it were, to go more and more in this direction, even in the UK. I saw there was a TV program done by Hindus. I can't possibly find the reference, but it was a British TV program, and they were pushing the case that Hindus ought to be able to have Hindu ceremonies. But also, then this was going to be leading on to the idea that then that marriage would be governed by Hindu laws, and any divorce would be covered by Hindu laws. So this is part of a package. And also, a little bit amusingly, in fact, when there were changes in Poland and the Catholic Church became very powerful in Poland about 20 years ago, it was actually proposed that they would change the rules in Poland and say that if you got married in a Catholic church in Poland, you couldn't get divorced. This is the same trend, okay? It didn't come into effect. And of course, it was a bit of an old goal because people rapidly realized who were pushing this, well, what people will do in Poland, because they do have a couple of generations of living under the sort of communist regime system, it's marriage being completely secular, they won't get married in Catholic churches. So that would be a bit of a known goal, and they didn't go further with it. But this is what's behind it very much, pushing people from certain communities into believing that religious ceremonies are legal, pushing them into thinking that these religious courts, tribunals are legal, and then the whole governance of your marriage will be under whatever rules this religious group pushes on you, and particularly what would then happen to you if you get divorced. But fortunately, nothing has gone in that direction in the UK, and I can't speak for many other countries, but that's sort of something to keep your eye on. Okay? So, just to be clear, your civil status changes if you get married. It has to be marriage. No confounding words, marriage. You are married. And then a mother or a father of a child, for example, who is married can sorry, let's skip the children bit. First of all, you're married and you have different legal rights supplied by the whole society through law, and you can also obviously get divorced under those rules, and both parties have a lot of different rights to try and make this thing as painless as possible. If you're not married, even though you're living as married, a mother or a father of a child, particularly if they're responsible for the child, can claim money or property for a child from the other person in this relationship, the father or the mother of this child, but not for themselves in most circumstances. If you live together, you're treated as individuals, you retain your own property, but you don't have all the powers given by the courts to adjust things if you split up. Because you're splitting up as two single individuals. You've never entered into a marriage, a civil contract marriage. Oh, well, this was just, I won't go into this, I think, because I've covered some of it. But you see, some religious cultures can't follow these essential rules of marriage. And you'll find them much the same in most countries where, the state wants to know what's going on and keep proper records. You have to have marriages in a public place. Many mosques don't let the public in, for example. I'm not picking on different religions. Don't let people in, or they don't let women in. 6 weeks public notice must be given in an accepted public place. This is called the bans. The parties must be 18 years old, single, prove they're divorced. The registrar checks all this out to ensure that you are able to get married. Again, checking out the things about people being related closely. I won't go into the technical details. And the marriage must be completely voluntary on both sides. And it is, in fact, the registrar's job or somebody that's been deputed, like the local vicar or priest, to be honest and open about this and refuse to go ahead if it appears that there is coercion. And of course, it's taking place in a public place where literally anyone can walk in. You can't be stopped. And you can see what's going on. So as you can see, some mosques and other organisations, for example, in the UK, have decided to sort of this is fine, but others it would be completely impossible anyway because they can't comply with these arrangements. Some hotels who wanted to arrange to have the marriage trade fell into difficulty because they then said, well, this place has to be perfectly open and public for anybody to wander across your grounds during this process. And they said, oh, we don't want that. No, we don't. We're a more private hotel than that. Okay. Somebody's just asked about bans, but it's just a very old form that we use for this 6 weeks notice. It has to go up in a public place. X wants to marry Y on Tuesday, the 19th of January in St. Botolph's or in a local hotel. This is public notice of this fact. So if you're in fact married to one of those, or now is your time to interfere. Okay, it's to keep the system open and public. Okay, so what's all? I think I'm winding to an end. Okay, what follows from all this? If you're not married, you don't have the protections of marriage. You don't have the rights given by a court on divorce. You're in a very dangerous and vulnerable position, especially if you have no or not much property, income, or if you have children. But also, all this applies as well if you are married legally in the UK, but you are pressurized or you think you must go to one of these organizations. It'll normally be your own your own religion or your own, cultural religion, and you think that they can do the things which a state court can do for you. Make legal separation arrangements, make a divorce, sort out your property, sort out the income, pensions, the arrangements for the children. They can't, and it's extremely dangerous. And of course, the people who are in most danger, just as in ordinary civil marriage, to be honest, are women because they tend to have more of the responsibility for the children. They are normally in a less financially satisfactory situation, and also they're also more likely to have been subject to violence or harassment in some way. So therefore, going into this system set up by whoever, a group of people within a certain culture who set themselves up and appoint them as then, another word, judges. Excuse me, how are you a judge? And what set of rules are you going to apply? This article by Pragna Patel points out, I didn't know, that in fact the Sikh religion doesn't actually have a set of rules within itself for marriage. So they're not even applying something like that. They're going to make up a set of rules that suit the people who have set up these courts. And usually, certainly in the past, they have always asked for some money, for some fees to come to them for doing this process. So I am just mainly repeating what I'm doing here. We won't go through the top one again or two. So complications. That's the third sentence. Mediation. Mediation is something that has come in from other places. It was, in fact, used by business people. It's become increasingly used as a technique to try and help parties to a marriage or a family discuss things together. It's only occasionally useful because, particularly if there's a huge imbalance in power between the parties or where there is violence, the rules of mediation are supposed to be that the mediator cannot get involved. You have to say from the beginning, I can't mediate between people who are completely, the balance of power between them is completely different. Or in fact, there's threats and violence involved here. You can't mediate. The person who's already been subject to violence or knows then there may be further violence cannot sort of protect themselves. And this mediation is not legally binding. Then they're using the words arbitration. There is something called arbitration. It's more formal. But again, it was set up for commercial disputes. It was like set up a process whereby you didn't go to a full court, but you went into arbitration. There is an arbitration act and there are rules about it that are supposed to make it, without being too expensive, mimic a court's decision on something, but give more room for manoeuvre for the parties to negotiate, and then say, if we've done this process, we agree that we will abide by the rule of the arbitrator. This is not suitable for marriage or family issues, and particularly, no arbitration court should get involved in the criminal law. And obviously, if we're talking about there being violence or threats of violence or anything like that, coercive control, anything like that, there's no power here for these non-state agents to be involved. They'd be interfering in the job of the state over criminal law. Please don't call them courts or tribunals. I know that this is going to be difficult because one automatically grabs for the nearest word. Please don't. I mean, be very careful about the word council and make sure that you're not giving the impression that you think a council is a sort of court or tribunal. We've got to quite clearly say these are organisations set up pretending to be courts or tribunals. They've got undemocratic, self-appointed members, and there are a lot of breaches of human rights involved in this. So in the UK, we all know the Equality Act 2010. Well, an arrangement like this is breached in non-discrimination against people, male, female, religious or not religious, and it also includes that you must be applying equality of opportunity between different types of people. It breaches CEDAW, the UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, because it actually asks states, and most states in the world are part of it, that you're supposed to be acting to eliminate discrimination against women in all matters, including marriage and family relations. So that is focused on your own courts, your own legal courts and tribunals, your own police, your social services or whatever, but it certainly doesn't encompass allowing the state to allow these sort of things to happen. And it's appalling that, for example, in the UK, women's organisations have now been complaining about this for 30, 40 years, and the government's not taking notice. For those who've looked into the Istanbul Convention, trying to eradicate violence against women in most European countries, well, the countries have agreed that they don't want to encourage harmful attitudes, prejudices, gender stereotypes, and gender-based traditions that put women down and treat them as inferior. We're talking about religions and cults, enough said. The European Convention on Human Rights, this is breaking the rules about discrimination based on sex or indeed religion, but in that sense, religion or non-religion or different religions, and also the fact that you have a right to trial, a right to a fair trial, and the rules are very detailed in civil and criminal proceedings. It breaks the Children Act in the UK, 1989, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as well, which the UK is in. Probably all countries are in, except the US, of course, because they have the rule that the best interests of the child should always be paramount when any state organisation is involved in that child. And that certainly covers, the courts and the tribunals, etc., and any form of legal proceeding that covers children.